Ever feel like you're just drowning in information when it comes to meditation and finding some inner peace?
Yeah, there's so much out there.
What if the most important pieces weren't, complicated techniques, but actually how you live your life day to day?
That's a really interesting angle.
Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through the noise, pull out the essential insights. Think of this as your express lane to getting well-informed without getting lost.
And this deep dive is especially for you, the learner, someone who wants to understand things deeply, but also, efficiently.
Exactly. Today, our mission is exploring Jhana.
Right. Now, you might have heard of Jhana as a kind of meditation state, but we're looking at a different perspective today from Ajahn Nyanamoli Thero in his book, The Only Way to Jhana.
Okay.
He suggests that jhana is actually the natural result of a specific way of living, a process of self-taming.
Self-taming. Okay. We've got Ajahn Nyanamoli's book, and we're lucky to have you here guiding us. So let's jump in. Ajahn Nyanamoli starts by outlining how the Buddha would initially train someone considered fit to be tamed. Sounds like a step-by-step thing.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
A gradual process. It begins with virtue and restraint, specifically following the Potimukkha, the monastic code.
Okay, the code for monks and nuns.
Exactly. But here's a key insight straight away. Ajahn Nyanamoli really emphasizes that the spirit behind the 8 precepts, things like avoiding killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, intoxicants.
The usual suspects, plus a few more.
Right. Eating afternoon, entertainments, luxurious beds. The spirit of these is vital for anyone starting this self-taming, even if you're not a monastic.
Oh, interesting. So not just for monks.
No. He makes this distinction. The 5 precepts, the basic ones, are great for, building good karma, merit.
Sure.
But the 8 precepts are what really support deeper Dhamma practice. That's his point.
So it's not just about being a generally good person, it's a more focused discipline for inner growth.
Precisely. That's it. And the training continues from there. The next steps involve what's called guarding the sense faculties.
Guarding the senses. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, think of it as being really mindful about what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, even think.
Okay.
And not getting immediately caught up in those first impressions.
Yeah.
Especially in a way that leads to unskillful stuff, negative thoughts, bad feelings.
Right. Stopping it before it spirals.
Yeah. Then there's moderation in eating.
Okay.
Not eating for fun or because you're bored or to look good or bulk up.
So why then?
Simply to stay alive, basically.
Yeah.
To end discomfort and to support the holy life, the practice itself.
It sounds very stripped down, really focused only on what's necessary.
Exactly. Purely functional. After that comes dedication to wakefulness.
Wakefulness, like staying awake.
Well, yes, but it's more about actively working to clear the mind of obstructive things, unhelpful thoughts during the day and also during specific times at night.
Ah, okay. A conscious effort.
Definitely. Then comes being present and aware in absolutely everything you do.
Everything.
Walking, standing, eating, talking.
Yeah.
Even when you're just being silent.
Yeah.
Really knowing what you're doing as you're doing it.
That sounds challenging.
It is. And the final step in this initial training phase is seeking out quiet, secluded places.
Like forests, caves, under trees, the texts often say.
Right. A far cry from our always-on connected lives today.
Totally.
And Ajahn Nyanamoli points out this whole gradual training sequence, it's specifically for monks and nuns still in training, not for arahants.
Arahants being the fully awakened ones.
Correct.
Yeah.
For them, these qualities are just how they live naturally. It leads to a peaceful abiding, mindfulness, but their self-taming process is done. The defilements are gone.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Ajahn Nyanamoli makes this strong argument that jhana practice is actually the end result of this whole lifestyle.
The culmination, yeah.
Not the starting point for meditation, which honestly feels kind of opposite to a lot of what you hear today.
It really does challenge common assumptions. That's a crucial point he makes. He basically argues you can't just jump into these deep meditative states if you haven't built this solid foundation first. The ethical conduct, the sense control.
It makes sense, like trying advanced math before you know basic addition.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. The later stages just won't work properly or they won't be stable.
So this brings up a huge question for, well, most people listening probably. What about us lay people? There's often this unspoken idea that, because we're not monks or nuns, it's okay to indulge in sensual pleasures. Does he address that?
Oh, he tackles it head on. He clarifies that being a lay person and living a life driven by sensuality are actually two different things.
Ah, one doesn't excuse the other.
Exactly. One doesn't automatically mean the other. He stresses that lay practitioners who are really serious about Dhamma, about spiritual development, they still need sense restraint. It's not optional if you want to go deep.
He uses an example, right? Anathapindika, a famous lay supporter of the Buddha.
Yes, Anathapindika. Very wealthy, very supportive layperson. But the key is, he only gained a really deep understanding of the Dhamma after his mind had been prepared.
Prepared how?
Through talks on generosity first, then morality, ethical behavior, and crucially, talks on the dangers of getting caught up in sensual pleasures.
So seeing the downside was necessary.
Absolutely. His Dhamma vision, his deep insight, arose precisely because he started to withdraw from that constant focus on sensuality. His mind was ready.
It really sounds like essential prep work.
Ajahn Nyanamoli uses this really powerful image here. He says, imagine a huge mountain.
Okay.
Someone standing at the bottom, they just can't see the amazing views from the top right.
Right.
Those views represent the benefits, the delightful things that come with renunciation, with letting go.
And the mountain is?
Sensuality. It's the big thing blocking our understanding, blocking the realization that's possible through renunciation.
That paints a very clear picture. Wow. And he also brings in Gaikara, the potter, and Yotipala.
Yes, another great story. This is from the time of a previous Buddha, Buddha Kassapa. It really shows that deep faith and virtue aren't exclusive to monks.
How so?
Well, Gaikara was a lay supporter, a potter. He had a profound respect for the Buddha and lived very virtuously. His friend, Jotipala, who was actually the Buddha in a past life, initially kind of scorned the whole thing.
Looked down on it.
Yeah. But Gaikara, despite being a layperson with regular responsibilities, lived by these strong ethical principles. Eventually, his example, and perhaps some other factors, compelled Jotipala to actually go and meet the Buddha. And he was totally transformed. He later ordained and became a monk himself. It shows how a layperson's example, in a mind that becomes prepared, can lead to huge change.
So lay life doesn't have to mean being stuck in sensuality.
Not at all, according to this view.
Let's shift to a concept that sounds completely backwards at first, chapter 3. No one wants sensuality. That just doesn't sound right on the surface.
It doesn't, does it? Seems counterintuitive. But Ajahn Nyanamoli explains what he means. He means that all desires connected to our senses, sights, sounds, tastes, smells, touch, are fundamentally oppressive, unsatisfying at their root, for everyone.
Oppressive, that's a strong word.
It is. He argues they inevitably lead to some kind of suffering, disappointment, or unease, even if there's temporary pleasure.
So if they're ultimately bad for us, why do we keep chasing them? What's the pull?
He connects this directly to our fear of being alone with ourselves, our fear of maybe emptiness or discomfort.
Oh, how does that work?
People often run from solitude, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're alone, quiet, you can no longer distract yourself.
From what?
From the unpleasant reality of your own desires. The restlessness, the constant seeking, the background noise of the mind.
So external stimulation becomes an escape hatch.
Exactly. A way to avoid facing that internal unease, the fundamentally dissatisfying nature of those desires he's talking about.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. So if we start to recognize this, that these desires aren't the path to lasting happiness, how do we actually begin to let go? This brings us to the idea of having a desired end desire, which also sounds a bit paradoxical.
It does. This is where the Buddhist concept of right effort comes in. It's part of the Eightfold Path.
Okay.
Right effort involves generating desire, making an effort, activation, persistence, upholding your intention. But it's all directed skillfully.
Skillfully how?
Towards preventing negative, unskillful qualities like greed, aversion from arising, abandoning them if they have arisen.
Okay.
And on the flip side, cultivating skillful qualities like kindness, mindfulness, and maintaining them once they've arisen.
So it's like using desire as a tool, but pointed in the right direction, like fighting fire with fire.
Kind of. Ajahn Nyanamoli addresses this potential confusion.
Yeah.
He refers to a dialogue in the suttas between Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, and a Brahmin.
What was the point?
The point was that the desire for arahantship, for complete awakening, that desire itself actually subsides once awakening is attained.
So the desire achieves its purpose and then falls away.
Exactly. It shows that a skillful kind of desire, Jhana in Pali, when aimed correctly, can lead to its own cessation in the end of unskillful desire, which is tancha, or craving.
So it's a temporary scaffold, maybe?
That's a good way to put it. Letting go of unskillful desires isn't just about gritting your teeth and using willpower. It's about redirecting your desire towards this gradual training we've been discussing.
The virtue, the sense restraint.
Yes, that whole path. As you practice it, it progressively weakens and eventually removes the very basis, the foundation, for those unhelpful desires.
Makes sense.
He also makes a really important clarification about freedom from sensuality. Even someone who is mostly free from sensual desire, like an agami, a non-returner.
High level of attainment.
Very high. But even they aren't free from all desire, like the desire for existence in higher realms, perhaps. But they've completely lost interest in sensual pleasures.
Why?
Because they fully understood three things about them. The gratification, the danger, and the escape. They see it clearly.
It sounds like a really, really deep level of understanding is needed then, not just intellectual.
It is. Ajahn Nyanamoli stresses that you need to be genuinely free from delight, welcoming, zeal, interest, even curiosity towards things that provoke lust.
Wow.
Before you can really claim to understand the peril of sensuality.
Right.
It's a high bar.
Yeah.
He also discusses that seemingly contradictory statement from the Buddha. This body is produced by craving. Relying on craving, you should give up craving.
How does he explain that one?
He uses the example of a bhikkhu, a monk, who desires to realize undefiled freedom, nibbana. That initial skillful desire for freedom becomes the very means to let go of all the other cravings that bind you.
Okay. And he brings in this term padana. You mentioned it relates to clinging.
Yeah, clinging or attachment is often how it's translated. But Ajahn Nyanamoli frames it more as a deep-seated assumption.
An assumption.
Specifically, the mistaken assumption that if our senses don't get gratified, we will suffer. And that gratification is the source of happiness.
But that's not the real problem.
He argues the real suffering is our resistance to non-gratification. Our internal fight against not getting what we want. If you stop that resistance, if you accept the non-gratification peacefully, then the need for gratification itself just becomes redundant, unnecessary.
That's perspective shift.
It is. He also outlines this nutriment chain of ignorance from the texts. It starts with simple things, like not associating with good, wise people.
Okay.
And that leads sequentially to not hearing good Dhamma, lack of trust, not paying proper attention, lack of mindfulness, non-restraint of the senses, misconduct, the 5 hindrances.
Like greed, ill will.
Right. And ultimately, profound ignorance. It shows how neglecting the basics can really feed into deeper delusion down the line.
It all seems interconnected. This points towards a fundamental shift in view, not just suppressing urges. Okay, let's get into a really vivid analogy he uses. The simile of the wet sticks.
Ah, yes, a classic. It's a very well-known teaching from the Suttas. The Buddha compares trying to light a fire using wet, sappy sticks. Sticks that still have that internal attachment, that moisture of sensual desire, to the futility of striving for enlightenment without letting go of those desires and the value we place on them.
Because wet sticks won't light.
Exactly. No matter how hard you rub them together, how much effort you put in, wet sticks just won't catch fire. It's impossible.
And the contrast is?
Dry sticks. Sticks that have been removed from the water, dried out, freed from that sensual attachment, that inner wetness,
And they
catch fire easily.
Yeah.
With just a little friction, a little effort. Ajahn Nyanamoli uses this to describe 3 types of contemplatives, or practitioners.
Okay, what are they?
Those undeveloped in both body and mind, they're like wet sticks still soaking in water. Hopeless case for fire right now.
Right.
Those developed in body, but not mind. Maybe they live ascetically, but haven't dealt with the inner desires. They're like wet sticks taken out of the water, lying on dry land. Still won't light.
Still wet inside.
Exactly. And then there are those developed in both body and mind. They are the dry sticks, ready to ignite.
And only they can achieve true knowledge.
Only the last category, the dry sticks, are capable of true knowledge, wisdom, and awakening, according to the simile.
He also relates this to the Buddha's own journey, right? His extreme asceticism.
Yes, he does. The Buddha himself tried extreme self-denial, starving himself, holding his breath. All these intense practices.
Did they work?
No. He realized they didn't lead to any superhuman states or true liberation. Enlightenment only arose after he gave up those extremes, nourished his body, and focused on purifying his mind through meditation.
And the pleasant feelings then?
The pleasant feelings that arose during his meditation then, like the first jhana he recalled, they didn't cling to his mind. Why? Because his sticks were dry. He had already, through his earlier efforts perhaps, diminished the value he placed on ordinary sensual experiences.
So drying the sticks is the absolute key.
It's the essential preparation. Cultivating virtue, practicing sense restraint. This is the process of drying the sticks.
And those stories of seemingly instant enlightenment in the suttas.
Ajahn Nyanamoli suggests that wasn't just random luck. Those individuals likely had minds that were already very dry. They had done the preparatory work, maybe over lifetimes, of withdrawing from and devaluing sensuality. Their sticks were ready.
So for us, especially as lay practitioners, the main job is?
The primary work, he argues, is this gradual withdrawal from sensuality in our everyday lives. It is doable, he says, but it's not necessarily easy or, pleasant at first.
And it's not just about physically avoiding things.
No, absolutely not. That's a crucial distinction. Mentally letting go of sensuality means actually devaluing it, seeing its drawbacks, its limitations, not just trying to suppress thoughts about it.
So physical withdrawal without that mental shift isn't enough.
It's insufficient. True withdrawal involves seeing the infinite peril, the profound danger in sensuality, both physically and mentally, seeing how it traps us.
But you can't just force that devaluation, right?
So, right. He points out you can't just decide, okay, now I devalue sensuality. It doesn't work like that.
How does it happen then?
It happens more organically by repeatedly seeing the danger, the unsatisfactoriness in what the mind currently values, like realizing that junk food you love actually makes you feel sick afterwards. Eventually, seeing that connection clearly, the desire lessens naturally.
That makes sense, seeing the consequences clearly. Okay, this leads us nicely into discerning the body. Why does our mind keep going back to sense pleasures, even when we kind of know intellectually they're not the answer?
According to Ajahn Nyanamoli, it's because we haven't truly understood the problem at its root. There's a lack of deep insight.
So intellectual understanding isn't enough?
Apparently not. If you haven't genuinely started to free yourself from that dependence on sensuality, you don't fully grasp the extent of sense objects or the nature of the pleasure being chased. Just, contemplating unsatisfactoriness on the surface isn't enough to cut the root.
So what is the correct way to practice mindfulness of the body in this context? It's not just about watching the breath or feeling sensations.
It's more than that. It's not just passively observing. It's about recognizing the idea of the body, seeing it as this peripherally enduring bag of skin, basically.
A bag of skin.
Yeah, containing sense organs that are naturally attracted to pleasures, seeing it more objectively.
How does that understanding arise?
He says it develops naturally with sufficient practice of the gradual training sense restraint, guarding the sense doors, moderation in eating, mindful wakefulness, seeking solitude.
So the earlier steps create the conditions for this insight.
Exactly. They create the mental space needed to see the body not as me or mine, but as just another worldly object. It creates some distance, some objectivity.
And with enough of that withdrawal,
you can start to see the five sense organs, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, not as parts of you, but almost as individual wild animals that need training. That's an analogy the Buddha used.
Wild animals.
Yeah, each pulling in its own direction, wanting its own food. Yeah. Instead of identifying with their desires, you see them as needing guidance and restraint. This then leads to the deeper understanding that the eye and forms, the ear and sounds, etc., are not self, anatta.
And that helps uproot
the underlying tendencies, the latent desires and assumptions associated with them. He also connects this to the idea of being uncorrupted amidst sense experiences.
Meaning
not being automatically intent on pleasing things or repelled by displeasing things, just observing them while maintaining that recollection of the body's true nature, living with that awareness.
Okay. Now, there seems to be a potential pitfall here. When you start realizing the negativity of sensual pleasure, you might think all pleasure is bad.
Exactly. A big trap.
This brings us to distinguishing sensuality versus agreeability.
A really crucial distinction. Ajahn Nyanamoli uses another simile here, the simile of the bait.
Bait, yeah.
Realizing the danger of sensual pleasure, like seeing poison in bait, can sometimes lead to this unsustainable over-denial, like deer who see the poisoned bait near a trap and then become so scared they refuse all food, even safe food, away from the trap, and eventually starve.
So we might mistakenly fear all sensory experience.
We might. We might think any enjoyment is suspect. But that's a misunderstanding.
Because the Buddha himself experienced non-sensual pleasure, right? That story under the rose apple tree.
Exactly. His recollection of the first jhana as a child, a state of pleasure born from seclusion, free from sensuality and unskillful thoughts, showed him that not all pleasure is to be feared.
In fact, it's helpful.
Yes. That kind of non-sensual pleasure is actually a key tool for abandoning sensuality. It provides a healthy alternative, a superior happiness.
So the skill lies in discerning the different types of pleasure.
Precisely. Not every agreeable sense object automatically counts as sensual pleasure in the specific way the Buddha defined it.
What was that definition again?
He describes sensual pleasures, as sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches that are specifically wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust.
Ah, provocative of lust seems key there.
It is. So, for example, admiring a beautiful sunset. That's an agreeable sight, right? But it's not necessarily a feverish, lust-provoking sensual pleasure in this negative sense. Enjoying nice music isn't automatically kama.
So the key is the motivation, the intention behind it.
Yes. Recognizing intentions aimed at that specific kind of gratifying, lust-provoking pleasure, and pleasures that are unrelated to sensuality, like the peace found in solitude or the simple satisfaction of a quiet dwelling, these actually become more agreeable as the mind withdraws from kama.
He also brings up how our environment plays a role here. Monks in villages versus the wilderness.
Right. He shares the Buddha's observation comparing monks living in villages who might be more prone to getting caught up in gains, status, neglecting seclusion, versus monks living in the wilderness who are actively fending off those distractions and really devoted to seclusion.
And the takeaway.
He makes this striking point. Even a monk who's feeling a bit drowsy, maybe having some lustful thoughts, but is in a non-provocative, secluded environment, that monk actually has a better chance of settling their mind.
Better than who?
Better than a really diligent, energetic monk who's trying hard, but is constantly surrounded by sensual triggers in a village or city environment.
Wow, so our surroundings really matter that much.
They have a huge impact, especially early on. When the mind eventually gets truly cooled down, by consistently not acting out of pressure, not taking the bait, then external provocations lose their power.
That's when you know it's working.
That's when you know the mind is genuinely becoming free. He mentions a simile about amputated limbs. You no longer feel pain where the limb used to be. Similarly, the triggers lose their sting.
But initially, restraint might feel forced.
Oh, definitely. You might have to force yourself, like staying seated when every fiber wants to jump up and do something else. But this forcing initially helps break the habit.
Right.
And it creates space, gives you perspective to see the trick or the bait of sensuality more clearly. The danger isn't just the external hooks, the sense objects themselves, but our internal inability to stop grabbing them.
Yeah.
Our own craving. That's the real issue. He uses a simile of a fisherman. The fish gets caught because it bites the hook.
So trying to engage with sensuality mindfully, that doesn't work.
He says it's basically a contradiction in terms. Mentally indulging, even if you tell yourself you're being mindful of it, just weakens your ability to resist later.
Because the mind leads.
Exactly. The mind is the forerunner of all things. What you dwell on mentally creates momentum. The mind has its own momentum, its own satana metta. If it's not tamed, external triggers will just set it off.
You mentioned the simile of the bait again with 4 herds of deer.
Yes, he revisits it. The first 3 herds fall victim to the hunter, Mara, the tempter, in different ways because they get intoxicated by the bait or become negligent.
But the 4th herd?
The 4th herd represents the true practitioners. They avoid the bait entirely. They graze elsewhere, indifferent to the lure. By doing this, they avoid intoxication and negligence and free themselves from Mara's control.
And Jhana relates to this how?
Jhana is described in this context as blindfolding Mara. By withdrawing from sensual pleasures and unwholesome states, you deprive Mara's eye of any opportunity. He can't see you, can't tempt you.
So taming the mind is like taming the senses.
Exactly. It involves reflecting on thoughts, not just acting on them impulsively, but also not being automatically averse to them either, just seeing them clearly without engagement.
He also briefly compares lust, aversion, and delusion.
Yeah, interesting point from the text. Lust might carry little immediate blame or guilt, but it's slow to fade. Aversion carries great blame, feels worse immediately, but can fade more quickly. Delusion.
The worst.
Carries great blame and is slow to fade. It's the root.
And the pleasure in non-sensual things, like cleaning a toilet, he mentioned.
Yes. That pleasure arises precisely because you're not afraid of pleasure anymore, because you've withdrawn from the dangerous kind, the sensual kind. But he adds a caution. Be careful even of non-sensual distractions.
Why?
Because they can still lead the mind back toward sensual thoughts if you're not careful. The mind wanders.
And with sustained withdrawal, boredom, neutral feelings,
they cease to be unpleasant. Even physical discomfort can start to feel okay even, as he puts it, like a kind of divine pleasure. This principle also explains the flip side, why people deeply immersed in chasing sensual highs often end up depressed, numb, and finding less and less pleasure.
Because the baseline shifts.
Kind of. The degree of hardship or ease you experience is determined by the mind's level of withdrawal and non-attachment. Boredom, just doing nothing. People often avoid that feeling intensely, even practitioners.
Why?
To escape that underlying restlessness or discomfort, the dukkha.
So, pleasant abiding with right view, jhana, leads towards nibbana.
Yes, and jhana is a product of that withdrawal, that disengagement. It's not something you achieve through frantic activity, especially activity aimed at avoiding internal discomfort. Relaxation shouldn't mean seeking more sensual input, but simply engaging in non-distracting activities that don't fuel more craving. Maybe walking, gentle chores, reading Dhamma.
He also warns against over-meditating.
Yes, if it's done while harboring doubt, or aversion to painful feeling, or secretly seeking pleasant states to avoid pain, that kind of effort isn't praised by the Buddha. It's still rooted in a sensual view, wanting pleasure, avoiding pain.
So the gradual training is key to building the capacity to handle the withdrawal itself.
Absolutely. It helps you build the resilience to endure what can initially feel quite disturbing. The silence, the lack of external input, the arising of old mental patterns. It can feel like withdrawing from a heavy addiction.
And the 8 precepts are foundational to this.
He really emphasizes them. Taking them, ideally for life, creates this protected baseline. It forces mindfulness, moderation, sense guarding. It naturally leads towards mind-taming and potentially non-return, that irreversible state of freedom from sensual dependence.
Because the view changes fundamentally.
Yes. When the view of sensuality as desirable is fully uprooted, it becomes genuinely inconceivable for the mind to go back. Like the leper cured of his disease wouldn't want to go back to burning himself for temporary relief. The appeal is just gone.
Okay, let's move to the final section we'll cover. Escape from the body. This sounds pretty profound.
It is. This chapter delves into the Buddha's teaching on union and disengagement, how we relate to our own internal experience and the external world.
How so?
Ajahn Nyanamoli explains that attending internally to, say, masculine or feminine qualities, identifying with them, getting excited by them, this naturally leads to seeking external attraction and union.
And that's a problem because
it prevents transcending one's inherent tendencies. It keeps you bound to that level of experience.
So what's the alternative?
True understanding arises from realizing that all our experience is bounded by the framework of the senses. The entire external world is only known through these senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, mind.
So the idea of a truly separate, independent external world
is a misconception from this perspective. All assumptions, all perceptions are actually internal to the senses. They happen within that framework.
That sounds potentially disturbing.
It can be. He says this realization can lead to deep anxiety for some, a feeling of being trapped within oneself, within the senses.
And our tendencies push us
towards sensuality, towards the external, precisely to avoid facing that fear, that potential pain or limitation.
He mentions the story of Rohitasa.
Yes, the Buddha, recounting a past life as a seer named Rohitasa who had incredible speed. He tried to travel to the end of the world.
Could he?
No. Even with immense psychic speed, he couldn't reach the end of the world. The point being, you can't escape the confines of our conditioned experience by outward travel, no matter how far or fast.
Because the world is experienced through the senses.
Exactly. This realization is frightening for an undeveloped mind, one still dependent on external things for happiness and validation.
So we can't reach beyond our senses.
Not in the way we usually think. Even our thoughts can't truly fathom what's outside this sensory mental framework. Misconceptions create the illusion of a graspable external reality that can save us.
And if we just take our internal pressure, like desire, for granted,
we get overwhelmed by it, constantly drawn outwards. The key, he says, is not acting out of that pressure blindly,
but instead
discerning it, guarding the sense doors, as we discussed, intentionally choosing abstention from the thoughts and actions that feed the pressure, taking responsibility for it internally.
Which brings us to opening amidst confinement. What's that about?
Okay, so the 5 sensual pleasures, are described as confinement. They bind us.
Right.
The opening, the escape, isn't finding some other direction apart from the senses or trying to deny them completely.
What is it then?
It's the removal of the sense of ownership of that which confines, complete non-appropriation, letting go of identifying with it. And this begins with the first jhana.
So the confinement is mind and body and consciousness.
Yes, the interconnectedness of nama-rupa, name and form, and vignette consciousness, that whole structure of experience. The opening within that is the removal of the I am and mine in relation to it all.
So the first jhana isn't about me entering a state.
No. It involves a fundamental lack of ownership, even of thoughts, even of the five senses themselves as they operate. It's a profound letting go.
And higher jhanas are further openings.
Yes, they involve relinquishing progressively coarser aspects of experience. But, importantly, jhana alone doesn't necessarily uproot the sense of I am on the level of deep-seated views. Wisdom, paññā, is also needed for that final liberation.
And trying to get rid of bodily pressure by seeking external pleasure.
That prevents finding the true opening. It's trying to escape outwards, rather than finding freedom within the confinement by letting go of identification.
So abandoning the hindrances is the freedom.
Yes. When they're abandoned, that is seen as freedom release. Withdrawal leads to happiness, joy, a calmed body, ease, a composed mind, culminating in that first jhana, that first clear comprehension.
And jhana meditation is really the integration of the whole path.
Exactly. He calls it the unification of the gradual training. Virtue, sense guarding, moderation, wakefulness, they all converge, leading to this gathered, internally steadied mind and the refined pleasure of seclusion.
But it can be lost, like gust reappearing.
Yes, he uses that simile. Even attaining the first jhana isn't permanent if you then go back to associating with things or people that provoke lust. If you neglect that foundation of virtue and restraint, the protection needs to be maintained.
Because virtue leads to blamelessness.
Right. A monk accomplished in virtue has nothing to fear regarding their conduct and experiences a blameless happiness. And right concentration, jhana, is unified with all the other path factors: right view, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, recollection. Right view comes first, understanding wrong view and right view.
And even just recollecting your own virtue helps.
Definitely. Recollecting your own clean conduct leads to an unwavering mind, happiness, joy, calm, ease, and concentration. It builds confidence. Suffering ultimately comes from choices rooted in greed, aversion, delusion. Choices that maintain craving.
Conscious intentions.
Conscious intentions often hidden, that need uncovering through self-honesty. And virtue naturally leads step by step to non-remorse, then happiness, joy, calm, pleasure, and finally concentration. It's a causal sequence.
Which circles back to the idea that jhana is virtue.
Exactly. They are inextricably linked in this framework. One arises from the other.
Okay, so bringing this all together, what's the main takeaway for us from this deep dive into Ajahn Nyanamoli's perspective on jhana?
I think the core message really is that jhana isn't just some, isolated meditation technique you bolt on.
Right.
It's presented as the natural, logical outcome of a whole way of life. A life lived with integrity, with sense restraint, moderation, mindful awareness. It's fundamentally about drying the sticks.
Letting go of that sensual attachment.
Exactly. Drying out those attachments to allow the conditions for the fire of wisdom and concentration to actually arise.
And this isn't just for monastics in robes.
Absolutely not. He's clear that even for us living lay lives, the principles of this gradual training are essential if we want to make real progress.
The spirit of the 8 precepts? Sense guarding.
Yes, applying that spirit, practicing sense guarding in daily life, cultivating the other factors. That's what prepares the mind, creates the conditions for deeper understanding and genuine inner peace.
So here's a final thought maybe for you, the listener, to consider. Think about your own daily choices, the values that guide you. Are they, in a way, wetting your sticks? Or are they helping to dry them?
Yeah, that's a great reflection. What small shift in how you live, maybe informed by some of these principles, might start to create the conditions for more clarity, more peace.
It's definitely food for thought.
We really encourage you, if this resonates, to explore Ajahn Nyanamoli Thero's The Only Way to Jhana for yourself, and maybe reflect on which part of this gradual training feels most relevant or challenging for you right now.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.
Thanks.